My hands were shaking as I adjusted my white coat for what felt like the 100th time that evening. The fluorescent lights of St. Catherine's Hospital hummed overhead, casting everything in that familiar sterile glow that made everyone look slightly ill. I was starting my first overnight call as a third-year medical student, and the weight of responsibility felt like a physical thing pressing down on my shoulders. The emergency department stretched before me like a labyrinth of curtained rooms, beeping monitors, and hurried footsteps. I'd spent 2 years buried in textbooks, memorizing diseases I'd never seen and treatments I'd never administered. But nothing had prepared me for this moment, when real patients would depend on decisions I helped make. My supervising resident, Dr. Sarah Chun, had disappeared 20 minutes ago to handle a trauma case in the resuscitation bay. She'd told me to handle any routine admissions and page her if anything seemed urgent. The problem was that everything seemed urgent to me. Every cough sounded like pneumonia, every chest pain like a heart attack, every headache like a brain bleed. I stood at the nurse's station, staring at the computer screen where new patient names kept appearing in the queue, each one representing a life that needed help, and I felt utterly paralyzed by my own inadequacy. That's when I first heard his voice. It came through clearly over the overhead paging system, calm and steady like a lighthouse in a storm. Medical student to exam room 7. Please. Medical student to exam room 7. The announcement was strange because residents and doctors were paged by name, but medical students were usually just grabbed by whoever needed them. I looked around the nurse's station, but no one else seemed to have noticed Paige. The unit secretary was on the phone. 2 nurses were charting, and the intern was frantically writing admission orders. They all continued their work as if nothing had happened. I walked slowly toward exam room 7, my heart pounding so hard I could feel in my throat. The hallway seemed longer than it had any right to be, stretching out before me like something from a dream. As I approached the room, I could hear labored breathing from inside, the kind of sound that makes every medical student's blood run cold because it means something is seriously wrong. I pushed open the door and found an elderly man sitting upright on the stretcher, his lips tinged blue, his chest rising and falling rapidly in short, desperate gasps. His wife stood beside him, her face a mask of terror, and when she saw me, her eyes filled with hope that I desperately feared I couldn't justify. "Please help him," she said, her voice breaking. "He can't breathe. He's been getting worse all day, but he did want to come to the hospital." I moved to the bedside, my mind racing through the differential diagnosis I had memorized for shortness of breath, but the list was enormous and unhelpful. Heart failure, pneumonia, pulmonary embolism, COPD exacerbation, pneumothorax. It could be any of them, all of them, none of them. I picked up the stethoscope hanging around my neck with trembling hands. Try to remember which side of the chest I was supposed to listen to first. The man's eyes met mine, and I saw both fear and trust there, and I knew I was about to fail him. Then I heard another voice, this one soft and close, as if someone was standing right beside me. Listen to his chest carefully. You'll hear crackles at both bases. Check his ankles. The voice was male, mature, with an accent I couldn't quite place, somewhere between British and something else. I spun around, expecting to see Dr. Chun or one of the attendings, but the room was empty except for the patient and his wife. Neither of them reacted to the voice. I stood there for a moment, wondering if exhaustion was already making me hallucinate, but the voice came again, patient and encouraging. "It's all right. Listen to his lungs. You know what to do." My hand steadied as I placed my stethoscope on the patient's chest. I listened carefully, moving from spot to spot, and there they were, wet crackles at the bases of both lungs, exactly as the voice had said. I bent down and examined the man's ankles, finding them swollen and pitting when I pressed my finger against the skin. Heart failure. The pieces clicked together in my mind like a puzzle I'd suddenly learned to solve. "Sir, I think you're retaining fluid around your heart and lungs," I said, my voice gaining confidence. "I'm going to get my resident right away, but I believe we can help you." I squeezed his wife's hand briefly, and then rushed out to find Dr. Chun, my mind still reeling from the mysterious voice that had guided me through my first real clinical challenge. Dr. Chun confirmed my diagnosis within minutes of examining Mr. Patterson. As I had learned the patient was named, she ordered the appropriate medications, and within an hour, he was breathing easier, the terrifying blue tinge fading from his lips as the diuretics worked to remove the excess fluid from his body. She pulled me aside afterward, her expression a mixture of surprise and approval. "Good catch on that one," she said. "Heart failure can be tricky to spot, especially when patients present late at night. How did you know what to look for?" I opened my mouth to explain about the voice, but the words died in my throat. How could I tell her that a disembodied voice had guided me? She'd think I was cracking under pressure, maybe even report me to the medical school. I just remembered from my cardiology lectures, I said weekly. The rest of that first night passed in a blur of admissions, each one less terrifying than the last. Around 3 a.m, when the emergency department had finally quieted to a dull roar, I found myself alone in the resident workroom, trying to finish my notes. The room was small and cluttered, with outdated textbooks lining the shelves and empty coffee cups scattered across every surface. I was so exhausted that the words on the computer screen seemed to swim before my eyes. That's when I heard the voice again, clearer this time. "You did well tonight, but there's much more to learn." I looked around the empty room, my heart racing. "Who are you?" I whispered into the silence. There was a pause, and then the voice responded, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "My name is Dr. James Holloway. I'm here to teach you, if you're willing to learn." I should have been terrified, should have run from the room screaming, but instead I felt an odd sense of calm wash over me. There was something about the voice, something gentle and professorial, that reminded me of why I'd gone into medicine in the first place. "Are you a ghost?" I asked, the question sounding absurd even as I spoke it. "That's a complicated question," Dr. Holloway replied, and I could almost hear a smile in his voice. "What matters is that I was once where you are now, and I remember how overwhelming it can be. The first night on call, the first time a patient looks to you for answers, the first time you realize that behind every medical term is a human being with fears and hopes and a family waiting at home. I remember all of it." His words resonated with something deep inside me, validating the terror and inadequacy I'd been feeling. "Why can't anyone else hear you?" I asked, glancing toward the doorway to make sure no one was witnessing me talking to thin air. "Because they're not meant to," he said simply. "You need guidance, and I'm in a position to provide it. That's all that matters for now." Over the next hour, as I finished my paperwork and prepared to head home, Dr. Holloway told me about his own time as a medical student decades ago. He described cases he'd seen, mistakes he'd made, and lessons he'd learned. He spoke of medicine as both an art and a science, of the importance of listening not just to hearts and lungs, but to the fears and hopes patients expressed in the stories they told. His knowledge was encyclopedic, spanning everything from the most common conditions to the rarest diagnoses. But what struck me most was his humanity, the way he always brought the conversation back to the person inside the patient. When I finally left the hospital that morning, the sun was just beginning to rise over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I walked to my car in a daze, exhausted but exhilarated, my mind full of everything Dr. Holloway had taught me in those quiet pre-dawn hours. I wanted to tell someone about what had happened, to share this impossible thing that had become my reality. But I knew no one would believe me. My roommate, another medical student named David, was already asleep when I got home. I collapsed into bed fully clothed, too tired even to shower, and as I drifted off to sleep, I heard Dr. Holloway's voice one last time. "Rest well. We have much work ahead of us." The next day, I tried to research Dr. James Holloway online, searching medical databases and hospital directories, but I found nothing. There were several doctors with that name scattered across the country, but none of them matched the man I'd heard, if he was a man at all. I asked around at the hospital, casually dropping his name in conversations with senior residents and attendings, but no one recognized it. The hospital librarian, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, who seemed to know everyone who'd ever worked at St. Catherine's, just shook her head when I mentioned him. Doesn't ring a bell, dear. Is he new on staff? I told her it was nothing, just a name I'd heard somewhere, and retreated to the medical library to study for my upcoming exam. My second call night came 3 days later, and I arrived at the hospital with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Part of me hoped the voice had been a stress-induced hallucination, a one-time occurrence brought on by exhaustion and anxiety. But another part, a larger part if I was being honest, desperately wanted to hear Dr. Holloway again. There was something addictive about having a personal mentor, someone who appeared exactly when I needed help and who seemed to understand the unique challenges I faced. As I changed into my scrubs in the locker room, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and was surprised by what I saw. Despite having slept poorly since that first night, there was a new confidence in my eyes, a sense that maybe I could actually do this impossible job. The evening started quietly, with only a handful of patients in the emergency department. Dr. Chen was off that night, replaced by Dr. Marcus Webb, a senior resident known for his brilliance and a complete lack of patience for medical students. He barely acknowledged me when I introduced myself, just grunted and told me to stay out of his way unless he specifically called for me. I spent the first few hours shadowing the interns, trying to make myself useful by drawing blood and placing 4 lines, the grunt work that medical students are relegated to when their superiors don't trust them with anything more complex. I was starting to think it would be a wasted night when I heard the familiar voice. Room 12. Go there now. I made my way to exam room 12 without question, trusting Dr. Holloway's guidance, even though I didn't understand how he knew where I was needed. Inside, I found a young woman, probably close to my own age, sitting on the stretcher with her arms wrapped around her stomach. Her face was pale and drawn with pain, and when she looked up at me, I saw tears on her cheeks. "Hi, I'm Alex, one of the medical students," I said softly. "Can you tell me what brought you in tonight?" She explained through gritted teeth that she'd been having abdominal pain for several hours, pain that had started around her belly button and then moved to her lower right side. She felt nauseous and couldn't eat, and every time she tried to move, the pain got worse. Classic presentation of appendicitis. Dr. Holloway's voice said beside me, "But you need to be thorough." Asked about her last menstrual period. I did as he instructed, learning that she was a week late, which immediately changed my differential diagnosis. Appendicitis was still possible, but now I had to consider ectopic pregnancy, a potentially life-threatening condition where a fertilized egg implants outside the uterus. "Excellent thinking," Dr. Holloway said. "Now examine her. Gently press on her lower right abdomen at McBurney's point. Then release quickly. If she has rebound tenderness, that supports appendicitis." I performed the examination exactly as he described, and the young woman cried out when I released the pressure, confirming the rebound tenderness. I excused myself and found Dr. Webb charting at the nurse's station. When I presented the case to him, suggesting both appendicitis and ectopic pregnancy in my differential, he looked at me with surprise. "Not bad," he said grudgingly. "Let's get a pregnancy test, complete blood count, and an ultrasound. You actually paid attention during your surgery rotation." I felt a surge of pride as he walked away to enter the orders. Dr. Holloway's voice came again, warm with approval. "You see? You're learning to think like a physician. But remember, the tests are just tools. Your clinical examination and patient interview are what guide your decision-making." Over the next several hours, as the test came back confirming appendicitis and the young woman was whisked away to surgery, Dr. Holloway continued to teach me. He explained the pathophysiology of appendicitis, why the pain migrated from the umbilicus to the right lower quadrant, and what complications to watch for. But more than that, he talked about the fear that patients experience, how the young woman had been terrified not just of the pain, but of what it might mean, whether she might have cancer or something else terrible. "Medicine isn't just about diagnosing diseases," he said. It's about alleviating suffering, and suffering has many forms. Physical pain is only one of them. Around midnight, I was sent to evaluate an elderly man with altered mental status. Mr. Chun, no relation to Dr. Sarah Chun, had been brought in by his daughter, who reported that he'd been acting strangely for the past few days, forgetting names and getting confused about where he was. When I entered the room, I found him sitting calmly on the stretcher, but there was a vacant quality to his gaze that immediately concerned me. I began going through my mental checklist for altered mental status: infection, metabolic derangements, stroke, medication effects. But the list was overwhelming. Start with the basics, Dr. Holloway said calmly. Vital signs first. What do they tell you? I looked at the monitor and saw that Mr. Chen's temperature was elevated at 38.5 degrees Celsius, and his heart rate was faster than normal. He has a fever, I said aloud, then caught myself, hoping the daughter wouldn't think I was talking to myself. That suggests infection, but from where? Dr. Holloway guided me through a systematic examination, and when I listened to Mr. Chen's chest, I heard faint crackles on the right side. Pneumonia, Dr. Holloway said. In elderly patients, pneumonia often presents with confusion rather than respiratory symptoms. It's one of the most commonly misdiagnoses in this population. I presented my findings to Dr. Webb, who ordered a chest x-ray that confirmed right lower lobe pneumonia. Once again, Dr. Holloway's guidance had led me to the correct diagnosis. As the weeks passed, I became increasingly dependent on Dr. Holloway's guidance. He was there during every call night, appearing whenever I faced a challenging case or felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. His teaching was unlike anything I experienced in my formal medical education. Personal, patient-centered, and deeply insightful. He seemed to know not just medicine, but also human nature, understanding how to talk to scared patients, how to break bad news to families, and how to maintain my own emotional equilibrium in the face of suffering and death. My clinical evaluations improved dramatically, and more than one attending commented on my rapid development as a medical student. But the secrecy was beginning to wear on me. I couldn't share my success with anyone because I couldn't explain its source. When my classmates asked how I was getting so good at clinical reasoning, I made vague references to studying hard and paying attention, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. David, my roommate, noticed that I talked to myself sometimes, muttering responses to questions no one else had asked. "You okay, man?" he asked me one evening after finding me having what appeared to be a one-sided conversation in our kitchen. "You've been acting weird lately. Are you getting enough sleep?" I assured him I was fine, just stressed about exams, but I could see the concern in his face. The situation came to a head during my surgery rotation. I was assisting in the operating room when the attending surgeon, Dr. Patricia Walsh, asked me a question about anatomical landmarks. Before I could answer, I heard Dr. Holloway's voice explaining the answer in detail. Without thinking, I repeated his words verbatim, using terminology I shouldn't have known as a third-year medical student. Dr. Walsh looked at me over her surgical mask. Her eyes narrowed. "Where did you learn that?" she asked. "That's pretty advanced knowledge." I stammered something about reading ahead in the textbook, but she didn't look convinced. After the surgery, she pulled me aside and asked if everything was all right, if I was feeling undue pressure from anyone. That night, I confronted Dr. Holloway directly. I was alone in the resident workroom, supposedly studying but actually sitting in the dark, staring at the wall. "Why are you doing this?" I asked the empty air. "Why me? What do you want from me?" There was a long silence, and I wondered if it finally left me, if this strange mentorship had run its course. But then his voice came, softer than usual, tinged with something that sounded like sadness. "I'm doing this because you remind me of myself at your age, passionate, dedicated, but terrified of making mistakes. I'm doing this because I can and because you need help. As for what I want you to become a physician you're capable of being." "But who are you really?" I pressed. "Why doesn't anyone know your name? Why can't anyone else hear you?" Dr. Holloway sighed, a sound like wind through distant trees. I told you that's a complicated question. Let's just say I'm someone who understands the path you're walking, because I walked it myself a long time ago. The specifics don't matter, but they did matter to me. I needed to understand what was happening, whether I was being helped by a ghost, hallucinating due to stress, or experiencing something else entirely. If you won't tell me who you are, then I can't keep listening to you, I said firmly. I need to be able to trust my own judgment, not rely on a mysterious voice that no one else can hear. There was another long silence, and I thought perhaps I had driven him away for good. But then he spoke again, his voice heavy with emotion. Very well. If you want answers, they're available to you. Go to the hospital archives, in the basement. Ask Mrs. Rodriguez to show you the memorial wall, and look for my name. Then decide if you want to continue our work together. With that, I felt a shift in the air, a sense that he had withdrawn, at least temporarily. I sat in the darkness for a long time, torn between curiosity and fear, wondering if I really wanted to know the truth about my invisible mentor. The next day, I found myself descending the stairs to the hospital basement, a place I'd never ventured before. The basement was a maze of old storage rooms and forgotten equipment, lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs that seemed to emphasize the gloom rather than dispel it. I found Mrs. Rodriguez in the archives room, surrounded by boxes of old records and photographs. She looked surprised to see me. Alex, what brings you down here? Don't tell me you're looking for more information on Dr. Holloway. I nodded and she frowned. You seemed very interested in him the other day. Is there something going on I should know about? I just want to learn more about the hospital's history, I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. He told me to ask about a memorial wall. Mrs. Rodriguez's expression changed, becoming somber. Ah, yes, the memorial wall. We don't talk about it much, but it's an important part of the hospital's history. Come with me. She led me through the basement to a small room I hadn't noticed before. On one wall hung dozens of framed photographs, each with a name and dates underneath. These are all the doctors, nurses, and staff who died while serving St. Catherine's, she explained. Some from illness, some from accidents, but all of them dedicated their lives to this place. My eyes scanned the photographs, moving across faces from different eras, different generations of healers who had walked these same halls I now walked. And then I found him. The photograph showed a young man, probably in his 30s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The nameplate beneath read, Dr. James Holloway, 1945 to 1982, internal medicine resident, died in service to his patients. My hands began to tremble as I stared at the image. Mrs. Rodriguez came to stand beside me. Dr. Holloway, she said softly, a tragic case. He was a brilliant resident by all accounts, dedicated to teaching medical students. One night during a call shift, there was a fire in the hospital. He was helping evacuate patients when part of the ceiling collapsed. He saved 3 patients but didn't make it out himself. I felt the room spinning around me, my vision narrowing to just that photograph and those dates. I'd been receiving guidance from a doctor who died over 40 years ago, before I was even born. Did he? I started, then had to clear my throat. Did he have any particular areas of interest? Mrs. Rodriguez smiled sadly. He was passionate about medical education. There are old newsletters down here where he wrote articles about teaching methods, about how to help students develop clinical reasoning skills. He believed that every patient encounter was a teaching opportunity. Several attendings who worked with him said he was the best teacher they'd ever known. I spent the next hour in the archives, reading everything I could find about Dr. James Holloway. He had graduated from medical school at the top of his class, completed his internship with distinction, and was in his final year of residency when he died. Former colleagues described him as patient, insightful, and deeply committed to his students. One article quoted him as saying, "Teaching medicine is not about transferring knowledge from one mind to another. It's about guiding students to discover their own clinical judgment, to trust their instincts while remaining humble enough to keep learning. The words resonated with everything he'd taught me over the past weeks. I returned to the surface in a daze, my mind struggling to process what I'd learned. I'd been mentored by a ghost. There was no other explanation that made sense. But rather than feeling frightened, I felt an odd sense of peace. Dr. Holloway had dedicated his life to teaching, had literally died in service to his patients, and somehow he was continuing that work even in death. That night, during my call shift, I waited nervously for his voice to return, not knowing if my discovery would change our relationship or end it entirely. Around midnight, as I sat reviewing labs in a resident workroom, I heard his familiar voice. "So now you know," he said simply. "I understand if you want this to end, if knowing what I am makes it too strange or frightening to continue." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I'm not frightened," I said quietly. "I'm honored. You gave your life for medicine, for patients, and you're still teaching. But I need to understand, why me? There must be hundreds of medical students who've worked in this hospital since you died. Why can I hear you when they couldn't?" "I've tried to reach others," Dr. Holloway admitted. "Over the years, I've attempted to guide many students who seem to need help, but most couldn't hear me, or they dismissed it as stress or imagination. You're different. You're open to possibilities, willing to trust what you can't fully understand. And more than that, you genuinely care about becoming a good doctor, not for prestige or money, but because you want to help people. That kind of dedication creates a connection, a resonance that allows me to reach you." We talked for hours that night about his life, his death, and his continued existence in some form he himself didn't fully understand. He told me that he remained tied to the hospital, unable to move beyond it, drawn to the work he'd left unfinished. He experienced time strangely, sometimes aware of every moment, sometimes slipping into long absences where years passed in what felt like seconds. He'd witnessed incredible advances in medicine. Diseases that had been death sentences in his time were now curable. Treatments he couldn't have imagined were now routine. But the fundamental challenge remained the same: how to train young doctors to combine scientific knowledge with human compassion. "I can't do this forever," he said eventually. "Maintaining this connection with you takes effort, concentration. There will come a time when I have to let go, when you've learned everything I can teach you. But until then, I want to help you become the physician I know you can be." I felt tears prick at my eyes, moved by his dedication even in death. "Thank you," I whispered. "I promise I won't waste this opportunity. I'll learn everything you can teach me, and then I'll pass it on to others. Your lessons won't die with you." Over the next several months, my education continued under Dr. Holloway's invisible guidance. I learned to see patterns and symptoms, to read the subtle signs that patients often couldn't articulate, to understand when aggressive treatment was needed and when patience was the better course. More importantly, I learned to see the person behind the disease, to understand that every patient was someone's parent, child, or friend, that every death was a tragedy that rippled outward through families and communities. Dr. Holloway taught me that medicine was as much about presence as it was about prescriptions, that sometimes the most healing thing I could do was simply to sit with a patient and listen. But keeping the secret was becoming increasingly difficult. My clinical skills had improved so dramatically that attendings began to take notice. Dr. Walsh, the surgeon, started requesting me specifically for her cases. Dr. Chen nominated me for a teaching award typically reserved for fourth-year students. Other students began asking me for help, wanting to know my secret for rapid improvement. I helped them as best I could, sharing the lessons Dr. Holloway had taught me, but I couldn't give them what they really needed: their own personal mentor who understood exactly what they struggled with and how to help them overcome it. My fourth-year rotation in the cardiac care unit brought me face-to-face with the limitations of even Dr. Holloway's knowledge. We had a patient, Mr. Garcia, who had suffered a massive heart attack and was being kept alive by machines while his family decided whether to continue aggressive care or transition to comfort measures. He was only 52, a father of 3, and his wife was torn apart by the decision she faced. I'd been assigned to his care and found myself drawn to his room during every spare moment, watching the monitors that showed his heart's failing rhythm, listening to the whoosh of the ventilator that breathed for him. Dr. Holloway was unusually quiet during this case. When I asked him about it, he said softly, "This is one of medicine's hardest lessons. Knowing when we've done all we can, when continuing treatment causes more harm than good. I can teach you clinical skills, but I can't teach you how to accept death. That's something every doctor must learn on their own." His words, usually so helpful, seemed inadequate in the face of Mrs. Garcia's grief. She sat by her husband's bedside every day, holding his hand, talking to him as if he could hear, refusing to accept that he was already gone in every way that mattered. The attending physician, Dr. Raymond Liu, asked him to participate in a family meeting where they would discuss Mr. Garcia's prognosis. I sat in the small conference room with the entire medical team, watching Dr. Liu explain in gentle but clear terms that Mr. Garcia's brain had been without oxygen for too long, that even if his heart recovered, he would never wake up, never recognize his children, never live the life he'd had before. Mrs. Garcia sobbed quietly, her oldest daughter with an arm around her shoulders, and I felt helpless in the face of their pain. This wasn't something that could be diagnosed or treated, couldn't be fixed with the right medication or procedure. After the meeting, I found myself alone in the hallway, tears running down my face. Dr. Holloway's voice came then, gentle and understanding. "You're grieving too. That's good. The day you stop feeling the weight of these losses is the day you should leave medicine. But you can't carry all of it, or you'll collapse under the burden. You have to find a way to honor their grief without being destroyed by it." I asked him how he'd managed it during his own career, how he dealt with loss after loss without becoming numb or broken. "Imperfectly," he admitted. "I carried some of it with me to my death, and I suspect I'll carry it even beyond that. But I also celebrated the victories, remembered the patients I helped, and found meaning in small moments of connection." Mrs. Garcia made a decision to withdraw life support 2 days later. I was there when they removed the breathing tube, when his family gathered around to say goodbye, when his heart finally stopped beating and the monitors fell silent. Afterward, I stood in the hallway, emotionally exhausted, questioning whether I was strong enough for this profession. Dr. Holloway spoke to me then, his voice heavy with empathy. "You are strong enough. I've watched you grow these past months, seen you develop not just as a clinician, but as a healer. You have the rare ability to care deeply while still maintaining professional distance needed to do your job. Don't doubt yourself." But I did doubt myself. That night, instead of going home after my shift, I stayed in a hospital chapel, a small interfaith room on the second floor that was usually empty. I sat in one of the pews, staring at the simple altar, trying to make sense of everything I'd experienced. I'd learned so much from Dr. Holloway, had become a better medical student than I'd ever imagined possible, but I was also exhausted by the constant secrecy, by the weight of knowledge that I couldn't share with anyone. I thought about telling someone the truth, confessing to a mentor or psychiatrist that I'd been receiving guidance from a ghost, but I knew how that would sound. Dr. Holloway appeared beside me then, or at least I sensed his presence in a way I'd grown to recognize. "You're thinking of ending this," he said, and it wasn't a question. I nodded, even though I knew he could perceive my thoughts, even if I didn't speak them. "I'm grateful for everything you've taught me. You've made me a better doctor than I could become on my own. But I need to learn to trust my own judgment, to make my own mistakes and grow from them. If I keep relying on you, I'll never fully develop my own clinical instincts." There was a long silence, and I could sense his sadness, but also his understanding. "You're right," he said finally. "I've been holding on too tightly, staying too long. That was always my flaw in life, caring too much, trying to protect everyone, even when they needed to struggle to grow. You've learned well, Alex. You don't need me anymore, or at least you need me less than you need to discover your own path." I felt a sob catch in my throat, surprised by how much his departure would hurt. He'd become not just a teacher, but companion, someone who understood the unique challenges I faced and who cared about my success. "Will you be okay?" I asked. "If you let go of me, what happens to you?" My eyes scanned the photographs, moving across faces from different eras, different generations of healers who had walked these same halls I now walked. And then I found him. The photograph showed a young man, probably in his 30s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The nameplate beneath read, Dr. James Holloway, 1945 and 1982, internal medicine resident, died in service to his patients. My hands began to tremble as I stared at the image. Mrs. Rodriguez came to stand beside me. "Dr. Holloway," she said softly, "a tragic case. He was a brilliant resident by all accounts, dedicated to teaching medical students. One night during a call shift, there was a fire in the hospital. He was helping evacuate patients when part of the ceiling collapsed. He saved 3 patients but didn't make it out himself." I felt the room spinning around me, my vision narrowing to just that photograph and those dates. I'd been receiving guidance from a doctor who had died over 40 years ago, before I was even born. Did he? I started, then had to clear my throat. Did he have any particular areas of interest? Mrs. Rodriguez smiled sadly. He was passionate about medical education. There are old newsletters down here where he wrote articles about teaching methods, about how to help students develop clinical reasoning skills. He believed that every patient encounter was a teaching opportunity. Several attendings who worked with him said he was the best teacher they'd ever known. I spent the next hour in the archives, reading everything I could find about Dr. James Holloway. He had graduated from medical school at the top of his class, completed his internship with distinction, and was in his final year of residency when he died. Former colleagues described him as patient, insightful, and deeply committed to his students. One article quoted him as saying, "Teaching medicine is not about transferring knowledge from one mind to another. It's about guiding students to discover their own clinical judgment, to trust their instincts while remaining humble enough to keep learning." The words resonated with everything he'd taught me over the past weeks. I returned to the surface in a daze, my mind struggling to process what I'd learned. I'd been mentored by a ghost. There was no other explanation that made sense. But rather than feeling frightened, I felt an odd sense of peace. Dr. Holloway had dedicated his life to teaching, had literally died in service to his patients, and somehow he was continuing that work even in death. That night, during my call shift, I waited nervously for his voice to return, not knowing if my discovery would change our relationship or end it entirely. Around midnight, as I sat reviewing labs in the resident workroom, I heard his familiar voice. "So now you know," he said simply. "I understand if you want this to end, if knowing what I makes it too strange or frightening to continue." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I'm not frightened," I said quietly. "I'm honored. You gave your life for medicine, for patients, and you're still teaching. But I need to understand. Why me? There must be hundreds of medical students who've worked in this hospital since you died. Why can I hear you when they couldn't?" "I've tried to reach others," Dr. Holloway admitted. "Over the years, I've attempted to guide many students who seemed to need help. But most couldn't hear me, or if they could, they dismissed it as stress or imagination. You're different. You're open to possibilities, willing to trust what you can't fully understand. And more than that, you genuinely care about becoming a good doctor, not for prestige or money, but because you want to help people. That kind of dedication creates a connection, a resonance that allows me to reach you." We talked for hours that night, about his life, his death, and his continued existence in some form he himself didn't fully understand. He told me that he remained tied to the hospital, unable to move beyond it, drawn to the work he'd left unfinished. He experienced time strangely, sometimes aware of every moment, sometimes slipping into long absences where years passed in what felt like seconds. He'd witnessed incredible advances in medicine. Diseases that had been death sentences in his time were now curable. Treatments he couldn't have imagined were now routine. But the fundamental challenge remained the same. how to train young doctors to combine scientific knowledge with human compassion. "I can't do this forever," he said eventually. "Maintaining this connection with you takes effort, concentration. There will come a time when I have to let go, when you've learned everything I can teach you. But until then, I want to help you become the physician I know you can be." I felt tears prick at my eyes, moved by his dedication even in death. "Thank you," I whispered. "I promise I won't waste this opportunity. I'll learn everything you can teach me, and then I'll pass it on to others. Your lessons won't die with you." Over the next several months, my education continued under Dr. Holloway's invisible guidance. I learned to see patterns and symptoms, to read the subtle signs that patients often couldn't articulate, to understand when aggressive treatment was needed and when patience was a better course. More importantly, I learned to see the person behind the disease, to understand that every patient was someone's parent, child, or friend, that every death was a tragedy that rippled outward through families and communities. Dr. Holloway taught me that medicine was as much about presence as it was about prescriptions, that sometimes the most healing thing I could do was simply to sit with a patient and listen. But keeping the secret was becoming increasingly difficult. My clinical skills had improved so dramatically that attendings began to take notice. Dr. Walsh, the surgeon, started requesting me specifically for her cases. Dr. Chen nominated me for a teaching award typically reserved for fourth-year students. Other students began asking me for help, wanting to know my secret for rapid improvement. I helped them as best I could, sharing the lessons Dr. Holloway had taught me, but I couldn't give them what they really needed, their own personal mentor who understood exactly what they struggled with and how to help them overcome it. My fourth-year rotation in the cardiac care unit brought me face-to-face with the limitations of even Dr. Holloway's knowledge. We had a patient, Mr. Garcia, who had suffered a massive heart attack and was being kept alive by machines while his family decided whether to continue aggressive care or transition to comfort measures. He was only 52, a father of 3, and his wife was torn apart by the decision she faced. I'd been assigned his care and found myself drawn to his room during every spare moment, watching the monitors that showed his heart's failing rhythm, listening to the whoosh of the ventilator that breathed for him. Dr. Holloway was unusually quiet during this case. When I asked him about it, he said softly, "This is one of medicine's hardest lessons. Know when we've done all we can, when continuing treatment causes more harm than good. I can teach you clinical skills, but I can't teach you how to accept death. That's something every doctor must learn on their own." His words, usually so helpful, seemed inadequate in the face of Mrs. Garcia's grief. She sat by her husband's bedside every day, holding his hand, talking to him as if he could hear, refusing to accept that he was already gone in every way that mattered. The attending physician, Dr. Raymond Liu, asked me to participate in a family meeting where they would discuss Mr. Garcia's prognosis. I sat in the small conference room with the entire medical team, watching Dr. Liu explain in gentle but clear terms that Mr. Garcia's brain had been without oxygen for too long, that even if his heart recovered, he would never wake up, never recognize his children, never live the life he'd had before. Mrs. Garcia sobbed quietly, her oldest daughter with an arm around her shoulders, and I felt helpless in the face of their pain. This wasn't something that could be diagnosed or treated, couldn't be fixed with the right medication or procedure. After the meeting, I found myself alone in the hallway, tears running down my face. Dr. Holloway's voice came then, gentle and understanding. "You're grieving too. That's good. The day you stop feeling the weight of these losses is the day you should leave medicine. But you can't carry all of it or you'll collapse under the burden. You have to find a way to honor their grief without being destroyed by it." I asked him how he'd managed it during his own career, how he dealt with loss after loss without becoming numb or broken. "Imperfectly," he admitted. "I carried some of it with me in my death, and I suspect I'll carry it even beyond that. But I also celebrated the victories, remembered the patients I helped, and found meaning in small moments of connection." Mr. Garcia made the decision to withdraw life support 2 days later. I was there when they removed the breathing tube, when his family gathered around to say goodbye, when his heart finally stopped beating and the monitors fell silent. Afterward, I stood in the hallway, emotionally exhausted, questioning whether I was strong enough for this profession. Dr. Holloway spoke to me then, his voice heavy with empathy. "You are strong enough. I've watched you grow these past months, seen you develop not just as a clinician, but as a healer. You have the rare ability to care deeply while still maintaining professional distance needed to do your job. Don't doubt yourself." But I did doubt myself. That night, instead of going home after my shift, I stayed in the hospital chapel, a small interfaith room on the second floor that was usually empty. I sat in one of the pews, staring at the simple altar, trying to make sense of everything I'd experienced. I'd learned so much from Dr. Holloway, had become a better medical student than I'd ever imagined possible, but I was also exhausted by the constant secrecy, by the weight of knowledge that I couldn't share with anyone. I thought about telling someone the truth, confessing to a mentor or psychiatrist that I'd been receiving guidance from a ghost, but I knew how that would sound. Dr. Holloway appeared beside me then, or at least I sensed his presence in a way I'd grown to recognize. "You're thinking of ending this," he said, and it was a question. I nodded, even though I knew he could perceive my thoughts even if I didn't speak them. "I'm grateful for everything you taught me. You've made me a better doctor than I could become on my own. But I need to learn to trust my own judgment, to make my own mistakes and grow from them. If I keep relying on you, I'll never fully develop my own clinical instincts." There was a long silence, and I could sense his sadness, but also his understanding. "You're right," he said finally. "I've been holding on too tightly, staying too long. That was always my flaw in life. Caring too much, trying to protect everyone, even when they needed to struggle to grow. You've learned well, Alex. You don't need me anymore, or at least you need me less than you need to discover your own path." I felt a sob catch in my throat, surprised by how much his departure would hurt. He'd become not just a teacher, but a companion, someone who understood the unique challenges I faced and who cared about my success. "Will you be okay?" I asked. "If you let go of me, what happens to you?" Dr. Holloway didn't answer my question directly. Instead, he said, "Let me tell you about my last day alive. It was a Tuesday, unremarkable in most ways. I'd been on call for 36 hours and was looking forward to going home, seeing my wife, sleeping in my own bed. But then the fire alarm sounded. It started in the basement, electrical fire, and smoke was spreading quickly through the ventilation system. Everyone moved to evacuate the patients. But there were 3 elderly patients on the 4th floor who couldn't walk, couldn't be moved quickly. Other staff were busy with patients on lower floors, so I went up to help them." His voice became softer as he continued the story. "I got 2 of them into wheelchairs and to the stairwell, got them down to safety. But when I went back for the 3rd patient, Mr. Morrison was his name, the smoke was thick and I could barely see. I found him in his room, confused and scared, and I was helping him toward the door when I heard the ceiling crack above us. I had time to push him toward the hallway, to shove him to safety, but not enough time to get clear myself. The pain was brief, just a moment, and then I was watching from outside my body as other doctors tried to save me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, imagining his final moments, the fear and pain he must have felt. "But you saved him. You saved all 3 of them." Dr. Holloway made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Yes, I saved them. And I've never regretted that, not for a single moment. But I did regret leaving things unfinished. I had a medical student that month, a young woman named Jennifer, who was struggling. She reminded me a lot of you, actually, brilliant but unsure of herself, terrified of making mistakes. I'd been working with her, building her confidence, and she was just starting to blossom. When I died, she lost her mentor, and I lost the chance to see her become the doctor I knew she could be. What happened to her?" I asked. Dr. Holloway paused before answering. "She struggled for a while after I died, but eventually she found her way. She became a pediatrician, and a good one by all accounts. I watched her from afar when I could, in those early years when I was still figuring out what I'd become. She's retired now, spent 40 years helping sick children. So perhaps my influence lived on through her, even though I couldn't continue to guide her directly. That's what I want you to understand, Alex. The lessons I've taught you, they don't die with me or with our connection. You'll carry them forward, teach them others, and in that way, the work continues. I sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing his words. Is that why you're still here? Because you have unfinished business? Dr. Holloway considered the question carefully. Perhaps. Or perhaps I'm here because I love this work so much that I couldn't let go of it completely. Death is mysterious, even to those of us who've experienced it. I don't have all the answers. What I do know is that teaching has always given my existence meaning, whether I was alive or whatever I am now. And you've given me purpose these past months, a chance to continue the work I started so long ago. We talked long into the night, and he shared stories I'd never heard before about his childhood in a small town where the nearest doctor was an hour away, how he'd watched his younger brother die of pneumonia because treatment came too late, how that loss had driven him to medicine. He told me about his wife, Sarah, and how she'd supported his dream even when it meant long hours and missed dinners. He spoke of the joy he'd found in teaching, how watching students master difficult concepts had given him more satisfaction than any of his own achievements. Each story was a gift, a glimpse into the man behind the voice, and I treasured every word. As dawn approached and early morning light began to filter through the chapel's stained glass windows, Dr. Holloway said, "It's time for me to go, Alex. Not just from this conversation, but from your life. You've grown beyond needing my constant guidance. You have the foundation now, the clinical instincts and the human compassion that make a truly great physician. The rest of your journey, you need to walk on your own." I wanted to protest, to beg him to stay, but I knew he was right. I'd become dependent on his voice, on his reassurance, and that dependency was holding me back from trusting my own abilities. "Will I ever hear from you again?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. Dr. Holloway was quiet for a moment. "Perhaps in moments when you truly need guidance, when you're facing something you can't handle alone. I'll be here, in these walls, watching over the students and patients who pass through. But our regular conversations, our nightly lessons, those must end. You have to find your own voice now, develop your own teaching style, because one day you'll be the mentor that someone else needs, and you can't teach them properly if you're still relying on me." His words carried a finality that made my chest ache, but I understood the wisdom in them. "Thank you," I said, and the words felt completely inadequate for everything he'd given me. "Thank you for choosing me, for teaching me, for showing me what kind of doctor I want to become. I promise I'll honor your memory by passing on everything you taught me." I felt a warmth spread through the chapel, as if the air itself was embracing me. "You don't need to honor my memory, Alex. Just be the best doctor you can be, and help others do the same. That's all I ever wanted in life or death." And then, gradually, I felt his presence fade, like a radio signal growing weaker until it disappeared entirely. I sat alone in the chapel as the sun rose, grieving the loss of my invisible mentor, but also feeling strangely liberated, ready to face the challenges ahead with the tools he'd given me. The months that followed Dr. Holloway's departure were both challenging and transformative. Without his constant guidance, I had to rely entirely on my own clinical judgment, and there were moments of doubt and mistakes that no voice appeared to help me correct. I misdiagnosed a case of atypical pneumonia as bronchitis, missed the early signs of sepsis in the patient, who thankfully was caught by a vigilant nurse, and struggled with the complex social dynamics of the medical team. But each mistake became a learning experience, and I found that Dr. Holloway's lessons had prepared me better than I realized. His voice might have been gone, but his teachings remained, a foundation I could build upon as I developed my own style of practicing medicine. I completed my 4th year of medical school and applied for residency positions in internal medicine, the same field Dr. Holloway had pursued. During my interviews, I talked about the importance of medical education, about how the best teaching happened at the bedside with real patients rather than in lecture halls. Several program directors commented on my maturity and clinical insight, qualities that seemed unusual for someone my age. I wanted to tell them about Dr. Holloway, about the ghost who had shaped my development, but of course I couldn't. Instead, I carried his lessons silently, letting him inform my answers and demonstrate my readiness for the next stage of my training. I matched at St. Catherine's Hospital for my internal medicine residency, a choice that felt both right and necessary. I wanted to walk the same halls Dr. Holloway had walked, to serve the same community he'd given his life for. My parents were thrilled, thinking I'd chosen for prestigious program and excellent training, never suspecting the real reason. On my first day as an intern, I stood in the same resident workroom where I'd spent so many nights talking with Dr. Holloway, and I felt his presence faintly, like a whisper at the edge of hearing. I wasn't sure if it was really him or just my memory of him, but it brought me comfort either way. The role reversal was startling. Now I was the one guiding medical students, answering their questions, and helping them develop their clinical skills. I found that I had a natural talent for teaching, perhaps inherited from Dr. Holloway's patient instruction. I could see when a student was struggling with self-doubt and when they needed encouragement versus challenge. I remembered how he'd pushed me just enough to grow without overwhelming me, and I tried to do the same for my students. One student in particular, a quiet young woman named Maya, reminded me of myself during those early uncertain days. She was brilliant but paralyzed by fear of making mistakes, and I made it my mission to help her find her confidence. With Maya, I tried to use many of Dr. Holloway's techniques, asking guiding questions rather than giving answers directly, encouraging her to trust her clinical instincts, and always bring the focus back to the patient as a person rather than a collection of symptoms. I watched her slowly blossom over the weeks, saw her shoulders straighten, and her voice gain confidence when presenting cases. One night, after she successfully diagnosed a subtle case of thyroid storm that several residents had missed, she thanked me with tears in her eyes. "You're the best teacher I've ever had," she said. "You really take time to explain things and make me feel like I can actually do this." Her words echoed what I felt about Dr. Holloway, and I realized that his legacy was continuing through me. As my intern year progressed, I never heard Dr. Holloway's voice again, at least not in the clear, conversational way I had during medical school. But there were moments when I felt guided, when the right answer to a difficult clinical question would suddenly appear in my mind, or when I'd be drawn to check on a patient at exactly the right moment to catch a deterioration. I chose to believe these were Dr. Holloway's influences, his way of watching over me without interfering with my development. Whether it was truly him or simply the internalization of his teachings didn't really matter. What mattered was that I was becoming the physician he'd seen potential for. I also made it a point to visit the memorial wall in the basement regularly. I'd stand in front of Dr. Holloway's photograph, updating him on my progress, telling him about interesting cases I'd seen or students I'd taught. Mrs. Rodriguez found me there one day, and I explained that I was honoring a physician who'd inspired me. She smiled warmly and said, "He would have liked you." From what I read about him, he cared most about doctors who genuinely cared about their patients. I wanted to tell her that he did like me, that I knew this from countless hours of conversation, but instead I just thanked her and continued my silent vigil. 2 years into my residency, something unexpected happened. I was supervising a third-year medical student named Connor during a particularly busy call night, when he came to me looking shaken. "Dr. Alex," he said hesitantly, "can I ask you something weird? Have you ever felt like someone was helping you, guiding you, even though no one was actually there?" My heart skipped a beat, and I led him to a quiet corner of the hallway. "Tell me what you're experiencing," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice neutral even though my pulse was racing. Connor explained that for the past few weeks, he'd been hearing a voice during his hospital shifts, a voice that helped him with diagnoses and taught him clinical skills. "I know it sounds crazy," he said, looking down at his hands. "I thought Maybe I was having a breakdown from stress. But the thing is, the voice is always right. It helped me catch a pee last week that I would have completely missed. I'm starting to think maybe I'm not imagining it. I felt goosebumps rise on my arms as I listened to his story. Could Dr. Holloway be reaching out to another student? Had his work continued even after he'd released me to walk my own path? This voice, I said carefully, has it told you its name? Connor nodded slowly. He says his name is Dr. James Holloway. He told me he used to work at this hospital a long time ago. I tried to look him up, but I couldn't find any current doctors by that name on staff. I closed my eyes briefly, overwhelmed by a mixture of emotions, validation that my experience hadn't been a stress-induced hallucination, sadness that Dr. Holloway had moved on to teaching someone else, and joy that his work was continuing. Connor, I said gently, I need to show you something. I led him down to the basement, to the memorial wall where Dr. Holloway's photograph hung. Connor stared at it in silence for a long moment, his face pale. That's him, he whispered. I mean, I've never seen him, but somehow I know that's him. He's been dead for over 40 years. I nodded and told him an abbreviated version of my own experience, leaving out some of the more personal details, but confirming that yes, Dr. Holloway had mentored me too during my medical school years. Connor's expression shifted from fear to wonder. So I'm not crazy? This is real? But how is it possible? I don't know how it's possible. I admitted I've stopped trying to understand the mechanics of it and just accepted it as a gift. Dr. Holloway was an exceptional teacher in life, and apparently death hasn't stopped him from continuing that work. My advice is to learn everything you can from him. He has knowledge and insight that you won't find in any textbook. But also remember that his goal is to help you develop your own clinical judgment, not to become dependent on him. When the time is right, he'll step back and let you walk on your own. Connor listened intently, asking questions about my experience and how I'd handled the secrecy. Over the next few weeks, Connor and I developed a special bond, united by our shared experience of Dr. Holloway's mentorship. We couldn't talk openly about it in front of others, but we'd find moments to discuss the lessons he was learning, and I'd share insights from my own time under Dr. Holloway's guidance. I realized that this was part of the legacy too, not just passing on clinical knowledge, but creating a lineage of physicians who understood that medicine was about more than science, that it required compassion, humility, and a constant commitment to learning. I wondered how many others over the years had been touched by Dr. Holloway's teaching. How many doctors walking around had no idea their excellent instincts had been shaped by a ghost's patient guidance. One evening, as I stood alone in the resident workroom, I spoke aloud to the empty air. Thank you, Dr. Holloway. Thank you for teaching me, and for continuing to teach others. You gave your life for medicine once, and you keep giving in the strange existence you're trapped in. I hope you know how many lives you've touched, how many patients have been saved because you took the time to teach students who needed guidance. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't get one, but I felt a warmth in the room, a sense of acknowledgement that let me know my words had been heard. I began to research the phenomenon more seriously, reading about haunted hospitals and ghostly encounters in medical settings. I found dozens of stories, nurses who received help from deceased colleagues, patients who'd been comforted by spirits they later learned had died in those rooms, doctors who felt guided by invisible hands during difficult procedures. The medical community, with its emphasis on empirical evidence and scientific explanations, dismissed these stories as superstition or stress-induced hallucination. But I knew better. I'd lived it, experienced something that defied rational explanation, but was nonetheless real in its impact on my development as a physician. As I moved through my residency and into my chief resident year, I made it my mission to embody the principles Dr. Holloway had taught me. I started a formal mentorship program at St. Catherine's, pairing struggling medical students with senior residents who could provide individualized guidance. I couldn't give them what Dr. Holloway had given me, but I could create a structure that supported the same kind of personal, patient-centered teaching he'd exemplified. The program was successful beyond my expectations, with student evaluations improving dramatically and several students specifically noting that the mentorship had been transformative for their development. I also began giving lectures on clinical reasoning and patient communication, drawing heavily on Dr. Holloway's lessons while never revealing their source. I talk about the importance of listening not just to what patients said, but how they said it, of paying attention to family dynamics and social factors that influence health outcomes, of maintaining compassion even in the face of repeated tragedies. Attendings and fellow residents praised my teaching style, noting that I had an unusual ability to make complex concepts accessible and to inspire genuine enthusiasm for patient care. I wished I could tell them I'd learned from a master teacher, one whose dedication transcended even death. Connor completed his clinical rotations and matched into a residency program across the country. Before he left, we met one final time at the memorial wall. "I haven't heard from Dr. Holloway in a few weeks," he said quietly. "I think he's letting me go, helping me learn to trust my own judgment." I nodded, remembering that same bittersweet transition. That means you've learned what he had to teach you. But the lessons remain. Use them well, pass them on to others, and his legacy continues. Connor promised he would. And we stood together in silence for a moment, two physicians bound by our shared experience of impossible mentorship. Years passed, and I completed my residency, then a fellowship in hospital medicine. I was eventually offered an attending position at St. Catherine's, which I accepted without hesitation. This hospital, with all its history and ghosts, had become my home. I walked its corridors thinking about Dr. Holloway, about the night he died saving patients, about the decades he spent trying to continue his work in whatever form he now existed. I wondered sometimes if he was lonely, trapped in this building, able to connect only occasionally with receptive souls who needed his teaching. I hoped that the work gave him purpose, that teaching brought him the same joy in death it had in life. I started hearing stories from medical students and residents about mysterious guidance they received, voices that helped them through difficult cases, or hands that seemed to steady theirs during procedures. Most dismissed it as stress or imagination, but few asked me privately if I'd ever experienced anything unusual at St. Catherine's. To those who seemed truly receptive, who I sensed had actually been touched by something beyond normal explanation, I'd take them to Memorial Wall and tell them about Dr. James Holloway. Some looked at me like I was crazy, but others understood, recognized the description of the guidance they'd received. A small, secret network of physicians began to form, all of us shaped by Dr. Holloway's continued teaching. We never spoke openly about it. How could we, in a profession built on evidence-based practice? But we recognized each other by our approach to medicine, by the way we prioritized teaching and patient connection over efficiency metrics, by our insistence that every patient deserved to be seen as a whole person rather than a collection of symptoms. We were Dr. Holloway's legacy, scattered across different hospitals and specializations, but united by the invisible thread of his influence. I like to think that he knew about us, that he could see the impact of his work spreading far beyond the walls of St. Catherine's. On the 40th anniversary of Dr. Holloway's death, I organized a small memorial service in the hospital chapel. I invited Mrs. Rodriguez, now retired but still involved with the hospital's historical society, several senior physicians who had worked with him, and a select group of current staff who I suspected might have been touched by his continued presence. I prepared a speech about his contributions to medical education, his dedication to patients, and his legacy that lived on in the physicians he'd trained. As I stood at the front of the chapel, looking out at the small gathering, I felt his presence more strongly than I had in years. I told him about how Dr. Holloway had believed that teaching was the highest calling in medicine, that every patient encounter was an opportunity to help a student grow, that the best physicians were those who remained perpetual students themselves, always learning, always striving to improve. I spoke about his final act of heroism, saving patients even at the cost of his own life, and how that selflessness continued to inspire everyone who learned about his story. I didn't mention the impossible truth, that he was still here, still teaching, still shaping the next generation of healers. But as I spoke, I saw recognition in several faces, a knowing look that suggested they understood more than I was saying. After the memorial service, I stayed in the chapel alone, hoping for one more conversation with Dr. Holloway. The room was quiet except for the faint sounds of the hospital beyond the door. Monitors beeping, footsteps in corridors, the ambient noise of healing work continuing ceaselessly. I sat in the same pew where we'd had our last lengthy conversation years before, and I spoke into the silence. Dr. Holloway, I don't know if you're here or if you can hear me, but I wanted to tell you that your work matters. Every student you've taught, every patient saved because of your guidance, it all matters. You didn't fail by dying. You succeeded by teaching us to carry on without you. To my surprise, I heard his voice again, faint before but unmistakable. Alex, you've done well. Better than I hoped when I first reached out to you all those years ago. You become not just a good physician, but a true teacher, someone who understands that our purpose isn't just to heal individual patients, but to create new generations of healers. I'm proud of you. His words brought tears to my eyes, and I whispered, Are you okay? I mean, being trapped here, unable to move on, is it painful? Do you suffer? There was a pause before he answered. I don't think I'm trapped. I think I'm choosing to stay, at least for now. There's still work to do, still students who need guidance. And perhaps when that work is finally complete, when I've taught everyone I meant to teach, I'll be able to move forward to whatever comes next. But I'm not there yet. And as for suffering, no, this existence has its own kind of peace. I'm doing what I love most in life, and that brings me contentment, even in this strange form. His words eased a worry I'd carried for years, the fear that I'd been benefiting from someone else's torment. Will there come a time when you're done? I asked, when you finally feel ready to rest. Dr. Holloway considered the question. Perhaps. Or perhaps medicine will always need teachers, and I'll always answer that need. I don't know if there's an end to this for me, but I do know that every student I help, every life saved because someone listened to my guidance, it all feels worthwhile. You asked me years ago why I was still here, what kept me bound to this place. I think the answer is love. I love this work too much to fully let it go, and in some mysterious way, that love has sustained me beyond death. We talked for another hour, and he shared thoughts on the evolution of medicine, how treatments and technologies had advanced far beyond what existed in his lifetime, but how the fundamental challenge remained the same, how to maintain human connection in an increasingly technological field. He worried that modern medicine was becoming too focused on efficiency and outcomes, losing sight of the patient experience and the therapeutic power of simply being present with someone in their suffering. That's where teachers like you come in, he said. You have to fight to preserve the human element, to remind your students that they're treating people, not diseases. As our conversation drew to a close, I asked him one final question. If you could go back to that day, the day of the fire, knowing what would happen, would you still go back for Mr. Morrison? Would you still save him at the cost of your own life? Dr. Holloway answered without hesitation. Absolutely. Without question. That's what we do, Alex. We put patients first, even when it costs us. That's the oath we take, the commitment we make. And I got 40 more years of teaching out of it, in my own strange way. I'd say that's a pretty good trade. His presence began to fade then, and I sensed he was tired, that maintaining our connection had required significant effort. Go rest, I told him, and know that you're not forgotten. Everyone you've taught, we remember. We carry you forward in everything we do. I felt a warm spread to the chapel, a final acknowledgement, and then he was gone. I sat in the quiet for a long time afterward, grateful for the impossible gift I'd been given, determined to use it wisely. My career continued, and with each passing year, I understood more clearly what Dr. Holloway had tried to teach me. Medicine wasn't just a collection of knowledge to be mastered. It was a calling that required constant growth, endless humility, and unwavering commitment to serving others. I saw colleagues burn out, leaving the profession disillusioned and exhausted, and I understood that Dr. Holloway's lessons had protected me from that fate by teaching me to find meaning in small moments, to celebrate every successful treatment, and learn from every failure without being destroyed by it. He'd given me the tools to sustain a long career in a demanding field. I began mentoring not just medical students, but also young physicians who were struggling with the realities of practice. I recognized in them the same doubts and fears I'd experienced, and I tried to offer the kind of guidance Dr. Holloway had given me. Patient, insightful, focus on their growth rather than their mistakes. Some of my mentors went on to become excellent physicians, and a few even became teachers themselves, passing on the lessons they'd learned from me. I watched this chain of mentorship extend further and further, each link representing Dr. Holloway's original influence, and I marveled at how one person's dedication could ripple out across decades and touch hundreds of lives. I also started documenting Dr. Holloway's teaching methods, writing articles for medical education journals about patient-centered teaching, the importance of one-on-one mentorship, and techniques for developing clinical reasoning skills. I never mentioned that my inspiration came from a ghost, instead attributing the ideas to a mentor who profoundly shaped my approach to medicine. The articles were well received, cited by other educators, and incorporated into teaching programs at medical schools across the country. Dr. Holloway's influence was spreading far beyond St. Catherine's Hospital, touching medical education in ways he could never have imagined. Occasionally, I still heard his voice, always at moments when I genuinely needed guidance. Once, when I was considering leaving St. Catherine's for a prestigious position at a research hospital, his voice came to me in the quiet of my office. "Stay where you're needed, not where you'll be most celebrated," he said, simply. I turned down the research position and remained at St. Catherine's, and I've never regretted that decision. Another time, when I was struggling to connect with a particularly difficult student who seemed resistant to all teaching methods, Dr. Holloway whispered, "He reminds you of yourself because he's terrified of failure. Show him it's okay to make mistakes." I adjusted my approach, and the student flourished. Years turned into decades, and I found myself becoming one of the senior physicians at St. Catherine's, one of the institutional memories who remembered how things used to be done and why certain traditions mattered. Younger doctors sometimes looked at me as old-fashioned, too focused on bedside teaching, when computer algorithms could provide diagnoses faster and more accurately. But I persisted in my methods, insisting that my residents spend time talking patients, that they learn to read nonverbal cues and family dynamics, that they understand diseases not just as pathophysiology, but as lived experiences. Some appreciated this teaching, others tolerated it, but all of them were better physicians for it. I began to notice that I was becoming like Dr. Holloway myself, the dedicated teacher who stayed late to help struggling students, who was known for patient explanations and thoughtful guidance, who always brought conversations back to the patient's experience. Sometimes I wondered if this was his final lesson, if by teaching me so thoroughly, he created someone who could carry on his work directly rather than from beyond death. Perhaps this was his legacy, not just the individual doctors he guided, but philosophy of medical education that would outlive even his ghost. On quiet nights, when I walked the halls of St. Catherine's after finishing my rounds, I sometimes felt his presence in the building, a watchful guardian still looking after the patients and students who passed through. I'd stop by the memorial wall occasionally, looking at his photograph, thinking about the man behind the image and the impossible gift he'd given me. I'd tell him about the hospital's changes, about new treatments and technologies, about students who reminded me of my younger self. I didn't know if he could still hear me, but speaking to him brought me comfort and helped me process the challenges of medical practice. As I approached retirement age, I began to think about my own legacy, about what I would leave behind when I could no longer practice medicine. I'd never married, never had children, having devoted most of my life to my work and my students. But I realized I had dozens of professional children, physicians I'd trained who were now training others, creating branches on a family tree of medical education that extended back to Dr. Holloway and would continue forward long after I was gone. That realization brought me deep satisfaction. I might not have biological descendants, but I had something potentially more powerful, a lineage of healers who share a philosophy about how medicine should be practiced. I decided to write a book about medical education, drawing on all the lessons Dr. Holloway had taught me and all the experience I'd accumulated over decades of practice. I called it The Invisible Mentor: Lessons in Medical Teaching and Patient Care. In it, I discuss the importance of personal mentorship, the value of seeing patients as people rather than cases, and techniques for developing clinical intuition alongside scientific knowledge. I dedicated the book to Dr. James Holloway, whose teaching transcended all boundaries and whose influence shaped generations of physicians. The book was published by a medical press and found a modest but dedicated audience among medical educators who resonated with its message. On my last day of practice at St. Catherine's Hospital, before officially retiring after 4 decades of service, I made one final visit to the memorial wall. I stood before Dr. Holloway's photograph, looking at his young, smiling face, thinking about everything he'd taught me and everyone he'd influenced through our connection. "Thank you," I said softly, "for everything, for the guidance, the patience, the wisdom. You changed my life, and through me, you changed countless others. I hope I've honored your legacy." To my surprise, I heard his voice one last time, as clear as it had been on that first night in medical school. "You've done more than honor it, Alex. You've expanded it, taken what I taught you and made it your own, then passed it on to others who will do the same. This is how medicine advances, not just through new treatments and technologies, but through teachers who care deeply about their students and patients who invest their lives in healing others. You've been a worthy successor, and I'm grateful our paths cross. Will you still be here?" I asked, "Still watching over the hospital? Still teaching?" Dr. Holloway's voice carried warmth and perhaps a hint of sadness. "For as long as I'm needed. There will always be medical students who need guidance, patients who need compassionate care, and teachers who need reminding of why this work matters. As long as that's true, I'll remain. But perhaps one day, when medicine has evolved beyond the need for ghosts like me, I'll finally be able to rest. Until then, the work continues." We said our goodbyes, and this time I felt a sense of completion rather than loss. I'd learned what he had to teach me, passed it on to others, and created structures to ensure that the philosophy of medical education would continue. As I walked out of the basement for the last time as an active physician, I thought about all the students and patients who would benefit from Dr. Holloway's invisible presence, all the lives that would be touched by a teacher whose dedication had proven stronger than death itself. I heard later that year from several former students that they'd experienced strange guidance during difficult cases, voices that seemed to come from nowhere but provided exactly the insight they needed. I smiled when I heard these stories, knowing that Dr. Holloway's work continued, that he was still finding students who needed him and offering the gift of his knowledge and experience. The network of physicians he'd influenced, directly or indirectly, now numbered in the hundreds, perhaps thousands, all of us connected by invisible threads of teaching and learning that spanned decades and transcended the boundary between life and death. Sometimes I wonder what will happen to Dr. Holloway when St. Catherine's Hospital is eventually torn down or renovated beyond recognition, as all buildings eventually are. Will he be released then, finally able to move on to whatever comes after death? Or will his spirit remain bound to the ground itself where he died in service to his patients? I don't know, and perhaps it doesn't matter. What matters is that he taught me, and I taught others, and they will teach still others, creating an endless chain of mentorship and compassion that may well outlast any physical building. As I sit here now, writing these words, I'm an old man reflecting on a career that exceeded my wildest dreams. I never became famous, never made groundbreaking medical discoveries, never had my name attached to a disease or treatment, but I taught hundreds of students, cared for thousands of patients, and passed on the lessons of a teacher who loved medicine so much that even death couldn't stop him from practicing his craft. If there's any meaning to be found in life, surely it's in that kind of dedication, that commitment to something larger than ourselves. I still visit St. Catherine's Hospital occasionally, walking through corridors that hold 40 years of memories. I stop by the memorial wall and look at Dr. Holloway's photograph, and sometimes I speak to him, updating him on former students' accomplishments or new developments in medical education. I don't know if he hears me anymore. Our connection has faded as I've aged and moved away from active practice. But I like to think he knows, somehow, that his work continues, that the seeds he planted in one terrified medical student grew into a tree that now provides shade and shelter for many others. The mystery of Dr. James Holloway remains unsolved in any conventional sense. I never discovered how a spirit could remain bound to a physical location for decades, never understood the mechanism by which his voice reached me and others like me. Science offers no explanation for such phenomena, and I've long since stopped trying to find one. Some things, I've learned, must simply be accepted as gifts, experienced rather than explained. The mysterious mentor who guided me through my medical education was real in every way that mattered, and his influence shaped not just my career but my entire life. To any medical student reading this who hears a voice offering guidance, who feels the presence of an invisible teacher during difficult moments, listen, learn. Let yourself be shaped by knowledge and wisdom that comes from unexpected sources. And then, when the time comes, pass those lessons on to others. That's how the work of healing continues, generation after generation, teacher after teacher, each of us standing on the shoulders of those who came before, each of us reaching down to lift up those who come after. Dr. James Holloway gave his life for medicine twice. Once a physical death that came from saving patients, and again in the decision to remain and continue teaching rather than moving on to whatever peace awaited him. His is a legacy of selfless service, of dedication that transcends all boundaries, of love for the work that proves stronger than any obstacle. I was blessed beyond measure to be one of his students, and I've tried to live in a way that honors that blessing. The invisible mentor taught me that medicine is more than diagnosis and treatment, more than scientific knowledge and technical skill. It's about presence, compassion, connection, about seeing humanity in every patient and potential in every student. These lessons, learned in quiet conversations with a voice no one else could hear, shaped me into the physician I became. And now, as I look back on a long career devoted to healing and teaching, I understand that Dr. Holloway's greatest gift wasn't the clinical knowledge he shared, but a reminder that our work matters, that every patient we help and every student we teach creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. So this is my story, the tale of a medical student guided by a mentor no one else could meet, taught by a teacher whose dedication proved stronger than death, shaped by lessons that came from beyond the grave. It's a strange story, an impossible story, and yet it's my truth. And perhaps in some hospital somewhere, another frightened student is hearing a patient voice offering guidance. Another struggling physician is feeling hands steadying theirs during a difficult procedure. Another teacher is receiving inspiration from a source they can't quite identify. If so, then the work continues, the legacy grows, and Dr. James Holloway's influence spreads ever outward, touching lives and changing medicine in ways both subtle and profound. The invisible mentor remains invisible, but his impact is undeniable, and that, perhaps, is the greatest testament to a life devoted to teaching, not the accolades received or the recognition achieved, but the quiet, lasting influence on those who follow after. Dr. Holloway saved 3 patients on the day he died, but through his continued teaching, he saved thousands more, and through the physicians he trained, he'll save thousands more still, long after every trace of his earthly existence has faded. That is a legacy worth having, a purpose worth pursuing, and a love worth celebrating. Thank you, Dr. Holloway, wherever you are now. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for believing in me. And thank you for showing me that medicine, at its best, is an act of love for patients, for students, for the work itself. I'll carry that lesson with me until my own final day, and I'll do my best to pass it on to everyone I meet. That, I believe, is what you wanted all along. Not gratitude, not fame, not recognition. Just a continuation of the work, the passing of the torch from one generation of healers to the next. You have that, Dr. Holloway. You have it in abundance, and it will continue long after I'm gone too. And so the story ends where it began, with a medical student facing the terrifying responsibility of caring for human lives, guided by a voice that shouldn't exist, but does, shaped by lessons that transcend the boundary between life and death. Whether you believe this tale or dismiss as fantasy, one truth remains. Medicine needs teachers who care deeply, who invest themselves fully in their students' development, who understand that every patient encounter is sacred ground where suffering might be eased and hope might be restored. We need mentors who remind us why we chose this impossible profession, who help us navigate the darkness without losing our way, who show us that despite all the tragedy and loss we witness, the work remains worthwhile. I had such a mentor, and though no one else could meet him, his influence was undeniably real. Perhaps you have a mentor like that too, someone whose voice guides you in difficult moments, whose presence you feel even when you're alone, whose lessons shape you in ways both profound and subtle. Listen to that voice. Honor that presence. Learn those lessons. And then, when the time comes, become that mentor for someone else. The invisible mentor taught me one final truth, that love is the most powerful force in the universe, capable of transcending time, space, and even death itself. Dr. James Holloway loved medicine so completely that he found a way to continue practicing it long after his physical death. He loved teaching so deeply that he remained bound to this world to guide struggling students. He loved his patients so fiercely that he gave his life for them not once, but continuously, every day of his extended existence. That kind of love changes the world, one student at a time, one patient at a time, one act of healing at a time. It creates ripples that extend across decades and generations, touching lives in ways we can never fully measure or comprehend. And it reminds us that while medicine is practiced by mortals, its essence, the drive to heal, to comfort, to ease suffering, is something eternal, something that connects us to every physician who came before and everyone who will come after. So to every medical student feeling overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility, to every resident questioning whether they're good enough, to every physician wondering if their work matters, know this: you are part of something larger than yourself. You stand in a long line of healers stretching back through history, and you will pass your knowledge and compassion forward to those who follow. You may have mentors you can see and others you cannot, but all of them are real in their impact on your development. Trust the guidance you receive, wherever it comes from. Learn everything you can from every source available to you. And most importantly, never forget that behind every patient is a person. Behind every disease is a human story. And behind every medical encounter is an opportunity to practice the healing art with both science and love. Dr. James Holloway taught me these lessons through the impossible gift of his continued presence. I've tried to teach them to others through my own work as an educator. And now, through these words, I pass them on to you, whoever you are, wherever you are in your medical journey. The work continues. The legacy grows. The invisible mentors remain at their posts, watching over new generations of healers, offering guidance to those who need it most. And in hospitals everywhere, in quiet moments during long call nights, in desperate situations where young physicians face challenges beyond their experience, voices whisper encouragement, hands provide steadiness, and the spirits of dedicated teachers who love their work too much to fully leave it continue their eternal rounds. They are there. They are real. And they are waiting to teach anyone with the courage to listen. This is my testimony, my truth, my gift to you. Believe it or don't, that's your choice. But if you ever hear a voice offering guidance when you're alone, if you ever feel a presence helping you through a difficult case, if you ever experience knowledge appearing in your mind from a source you can't identify, don't dismiss it. Don't rationalize it away. Accept it, learn from it, and then pass it forward. That's how the work of healing continues, generation after generation, teacher after teacher, each of us linked in an unbroken chain of mentorship and compassion that stretches from the distant past into the unlimited future. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for considering its implications. And thank you in advance for the healing work you will do, the students you will teach, and the legacy you will create. We are all connected in this great endeavor of medicine, all of us working toward the same goal of easing suffering and restoring hope. Some of us work in the visible world and some in the invisible, but we all serve the same calling, and that calling is eternal. May you find your own mentors, visible and invisible. May you learn their lessons well. May you pass them forward faithfully. And may you discover, as I did, that medicine is not just a profession, but a sacred trust, a privilege that demands our very best, and a love that can transcend even death itself. The invisible mentor waits in the shadows of every hospital, ready to guide the next student who needs help. Listen carefully. You might hear him too. And when you do, remember my story and know that you're not alone, that you're part of something ancient and ongoing, and that the work you do matters more than you can possibly imagine. This is the end of my tale, but it's not the end of the story. The story continues with you, with every patient you treat, with every student you teach, with every act of healing you perform. Write your chapter well. Make it worthy of those who came before, and create a legacy that will inspire those who come after. That is our calling, our purpose, our gift to a world that desperately needs healing. Thank you, Dr. Holloway, one last time. Your student has graduated, your lessons have been learned, your legacy has been secured. Rest well when you finally can. You've earned it many times over. And know that your influence will echo through time eternal, touching lives and changing medicine in ways both visible and invisible, just as you always hoped it would. The invisible mentor's work is never done, but perhaps someday it will be complete. Until then, the teaching continues, the healing continues, and the love that drives both continues unabated, unstoppable, eternal. And that, I believe, is exactly as it should be.